Wonderful Cook Along Live. Let me get this music stopped again. There we are. Technical difficulties aside, hope your guys' week has been going well. Mine's been going fantastic. We're going to get started today by turning on our cooktop, and we're going to have our little pot that we're going to be boiling our potatoes in. We're going to get the potatoes started first because they take about 20 minutes to kind of soften up or parboil, and then we'll get our steak cooked, which will take about 10 minutes or so. While we're waiting for the potatoes, we'll get all of our stuff for the steak ready, and then we'll get our peas in last because they cook super quick. So we're going to get this set up to a boil. And we also want to put our oven on maybe like 325. You don't want it too hot. It's kind of a warm holding block for anything that we've cooked that we want to keep warm if things are taking a little longer than we expect. So go ahead and get this guy set to bake at like 325, 315, 325, something like that. You don't necessarily want to keep cooking something too much or too hard in there. We just kind of want to get it started. So moving on, we're going to get our hydration squared away. Today I'm drinking Dogfish Head 60 minute. No, I'm not. I'm drinking Dogfish Head 90 minute. What are you all drinking? Anything fun, exciting? Glass of wine, a beer, scotch, whiskey? What's your poison? I'm done with that. I'll set you over there. That is tasty. And I hope everybody is having a great week. Cool. So we're going to let this here come up to a boil. I've got my steak set out on its own cutting board. And this just makes it easy for you to really quickly take care of your steak. You can set this cutting board aside and move on to chopping up veggies and stuff. Anything that I would be cooking along with the meat, I would go ahead and take care of on this cutting board. Or any other meats that I was taking care of if I were doing multiple things like, let's say, steak, chicken, etc. I would cut all that on one cutting board, set it aside, or put it directly in the sink, and then move on to something else, just to kind of keep things going. With our steak, we are going to need to do a little bit of prep with it. Now, ordinarily, if you're cooking a steak on a grill, or if you're cooking a steak in a pan, pan searing it or whatever, you're going to be keeping all of the fat on, and you're going to be leaving it the way it is, and you're going to want a thicker steak. With Steak Diane, we actually want the opposite of all of that. We actually want to take the fat cap off of the outside. You can leave a little bit, but it's not a primary ingredient in this dish. And we're actually gonna, if you have a steak that's thicker than an inch, you're actually probably gonna want to use a rolling pin or a meat tenderizer to flatten it out just a bit. You want it to be about 3/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch in thickness. You don't want it to be too thick. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim off the outside fat here. I'm actually going to save it, and I can render it out to use as a cooking medium in a different dish, but it's just not going to be working here in this one. And we're taking care of this while we're waiting for our water to come up to the boil. Has anybody watching cooked Steak Diane before? Kind of a history behind this dish with me. This is actually Gordon Ramsay's recipe. He did this on one of his cook-along lives, I guess probably 10 to 12 years ago or so. And looks like my chat is not on here. Let's do that. There we go. Have to go back and take care of that. So one of the first cook-along lives that he did, he actually did a very similar series, both on Fox, but even before that on his British, one of his British channels, at Channel 4, I think, did cook-along lives with some British celebrities, and Steak Diane was one of them. And that was the first time I cooked this was because of that. And I think for dessert we did Gordon's Flaming Bananas, which is bananas Foster, basically, but you get to flambe it, which is kind of fun. Always love working directly with fire in the kitchen. We are going to be doing some flambe with this Steak Diane, and I'll let you know in advance when we get to it. If you've never flambéed before, it's actually pretty cool. You shouldn't think of it as all that scary. It's really not that dangerous as long as you're just careful with it. Same could be said for a lot of things in life, right? Hey, Tom, what's up, man? So we got our steak trimmed up, no fat on the outside. And we got our fat just kind of piled up here. We're going to go ahead and season our steak while we're waiting for the water to start boiling. Good little bit of salt on the outside. Make sure you get all sides, all around the steak, even the little edges. Good amount of salt. And then we'll get some pepper on here. Go ahead and roll this around on the cutting board to pick up any little bits of salt that have missed the steak. And that's why I like to do this on a cutting board or a plate. On the cutting board, I can just directly start cutting and trimming into it. Whereas on a plate, I would have to season it. You dirtied the plate, now move it to a cutting board. I'd rather just leave it all on one thing. Cool, so I'm gonna let that sit over there until we're ready for it. The cool thing is this is also letting it kind of come up to room temperature a little bit, so we're actually tempering the steak while we're seasoning it. This has come up to the boil. I've got about 6 potatoes here. Well, I don't have about 6, I have 6. And we're just gonna get these going in the boiling water. Go ahead and drop them in. And then we're gonna, hey Siri, set a timer for 20 minutes. Get that going. Steak's ready. No, it's not, because I need to add some pepper. Hey, Laura, what's up? Always good to see you on here. Love that, Tom. Sitting at work, not working. Used to be a software engineer, and the great thing about that is you're always sitting at a computer, so you were always working, if you know what I mean. Okay, so we're going to save the fat, but I'm just going to set this off to the side real quick, and we're going to start working with everything else. Now, I am going to wash my knife off, and I'm going to kind of brush off some of the salt. So let's move over to the sink cam real quick while I take care of that. Can you guys believe it's almost October? It's like Halloween's right around the corner. Insane. I'd like to give you guys all a huge thank you for hanging out with me on Sunday afternoon, or in some of your cases, Monday morning. This is cooking is one of the things that kind of helps me alleviate stress. And so being able to cook along and hang out with everybody on a Sunday afternoon, even if it's virtual, and unfortunately I can't see any of you, does help me kind of decompress after a long week. All right, we're good there. We'll move this over here. We'll get some of this salt off. Now that the water's boiling, you can actually turn it down to like medium-high and just let it kind of, you don't necessarily need it to be a super violent rolling boil. You do need it to be lively. And we're basically just parboiling these. We're getting them cooked enough to where they're soft to the center, but not cooked all the way through. You don't want these to be falling apart in the very near future here. Later on in this cook-along, we're going to be slicing them in half to do our sautéed potatoes. So I'm going to align this butter so it doesn't fall over. And take another sip of beer. Hey, Michael, what's up, man? Actually, it's the opposite, Etienne. If you freeze a steak, jet fuel can't melt it, but if you temper it, it will actually cook a lot more evenly. Cool, so let's move on to the next couple of steps. We got our potatoes going. They got another probably 17-ish minutes, which is fine. While we're waiting on those, we're gonna start working on our mushrooms and our shallots. Now, if you were lucky enough to get like a giant shallot like this bad boy actually has 2 bulbs in it, which you can see. So what I'm gonna use is actually my nail, and just kind of slide around one of these bulbs on both sides. If you didn't get two, or if you got a couple of smaller ones, that's fine too. But if you need to break down something larger like this, that's what we're going to do. We're just going to split it in half. And no, I'm not just wiping it down on my floor. I've got a trash can right over here. And I want the bigger one for my steaks. I'm just going to kind of take off the top and basically just give it a nice little scoring through the outer layer of skin, and that lets you kind of peel it off. Makes it a little bit easier. You can also cut this in half, but no reason to do that if we're gonna... If it's got a flat end, there's no real reason to do that. The reason that we like to cut things in half is because it gives you a nice flat side to put something down on, so it doesn't roll around while you're trying to cut it. Sharp knife, something rolling around on a cutting board, not fun. Hey, Cindy, how's it going? All right, so shallots, we're actually going to cut these guys lengthwise. So what I want to do is I'm going to leave the stem on, but I'm just going to kind of trim off those roots, just like that. And that's more to get rid of the dirty root ends. We're going to end up taking this off in the future, but this is going to help kind of keep this together while we proceed. And we're going to cut horizontally. So put the flat of your hand, palm of your hand, like basically the I guess pad of your hand right on top, and just kind of hold it in place. And then take your knife horizontally. We're just going to cut most of the way through, maybe like 90% or so. We're going to do that a couple of times. If you've got a thicker shallot, you're probably going to be able to get 3 or 4 horizontal cuts in there. If you've only got like a thinner shallot or a smaller bulb, don't worry too much about it. Just maybe 1 or 2 and you'll be fine. I can do, looks like 4. And now what I'm going to do is cut off the bottom. See, now that held everything together. So what I'm going to do is come back to where I'll be separating all of these layers that we just cut. So like there. And now I've got separate layers here. And now when I cut through like this, I'm going to have nice slivers of shallot ready to go. Like that. And then any pieces that seem like they might be a little bit too big, you can kind of come through and clean them up, trim them up, make them a little bit smaller. Cool. Got our pile of shallots. If you really want to, you can also get no waste and just trim this up as well. And to do that, let's see, I'm probably going to cut it in half. And then here I'll just cut a couple of vertical slices most of the way through it. And then just chop through. And then the same with this one. You don't have to do this. You've got most of the good part of the shallot up here. This is really comes down to personal preference. If you really feel like you have to use all of the shallot, you totally can. Let's go ahead and do that with the other half of the shallot here as well. The amount of onion or shallot that you're going to add to your steak is going to be 100% up to you, your personal preference. If you love onion, or if you love that kind of red sweet onion flavor, go ahead and chop up both. If you only like a little bit, or if you don't like onions at all, don't. The dish is yours. You set up however you want to do it, and however you want to eat it is yours, your choice. We'll do the same thing with this. This doesn't really have a, I guess it kind of does. Do a nice little slice there and see if we can just kind of peel off that. Yep, there we go. There's usually one layer of shallot or even an onion that is just below the skin that is still going to be mostly skin. So as I peel this piece back, it's actually got a lot of leathery, skinny parts like in it. And those are the ones that we just want to get rid of. It's just easier because you can peel the whole thing off. And it hasn't dried all the way through yet, so it's still malleable enough to kind of come off and strong enough to not tear when you're peeling it off. So there we go. We'll do the same thing with this. This one will probably only get 1 or 2 horizontal cuts through. And really take your time with this. You don't want to slice through your hand. That's never fun. I have done it. Not in a while, but I have done it, and it's not a good time. There we are. We'll just cut through this one as well. Then we'll move on to our mushrooms. One of these days I should do badger and mushroom and snake. Why did it have to be snakes? Putting together a couple of memes there. All right, my oven is ready, which is great. Go ahead and just slide these up to the top. And then we'll start with our mushrooms. Cool beans. So there's a couple of ways that you can work with mushrooms. Now, these ones here, I got kind of lucky, and they're actually, the stem is cut pretty close to the bottom of the cap. So if I lay them down, there is going to be a flat surface that I can cut on. But oftentimes you'll get a box of mushrooms or a little carton of mushrooms, and these stems stick out, or they're like super crooked, or they just don't lend themselves very well to giving you a nice stable cutting surface. So there's a couple of ways that you can remove them. One of them is literally just kind of pinching them out like this, and you can remove the entire stem. And then you're left with just the cap. This is great if you're going to be like stuffing a mushroom, or if you want to put, I don't know, if you're doing escargot or something, you could put escargot in the mushroom cap and kind of roast it like this. When you're slicing through a mushroom, hey, Christina. Usually I would be. I'm actually kind of surprised that I'm not. So if you're slicing through a mushroom, you'll notice that the end of the cap is great. You get that nice mushroom shape there. However, if you have a bigger mushroom, or once you get towards the middle of the cap, you'll notice that there's a big kind of hollow spot there. Now that might be fine for your purposes. That might be how you want to cut your mushrooms up, and that's great. Another way that you could do this is, rather than just taking out the middle stem, you can use a paring knife or your chef's knife and just cut it so that it is 100% flat with the bottom of the cap. Sometimes you might take off a little bit of the bottom of the cap. That's not a problem. But now when we slice through our mushroom, all of the pieces are going to be filled and uniform. You're not going to have some that are a little bit, you know, thicker, and some that don't have that stem piece in the middle. So it's really going to be up to you how you kind of want to go through and cut your mushrooms up. I used to like just pulling out the stem. I've started getting to the point where I actually like leaving the stem and just cutting it flush. But again, this is it's your cooking, so however you want to do it is what you're going to want to do here. So I'm just going to cut all of these flush. And I'm going to take care of that first. Cut them all flush. It's like task switching. You know when you try and multitask and then you realize that you're actually not saving any time because it takes so much time to switch your thinking process from one thing to another? It's the same thing when you're chopping vegetables, or if you're doing any kind of other stuff in the kitchen. Take care of all of one task first, then move on to another. Because you're not task switching. I don't have to put down the knife. I don't have to move things around on the cutting board as much. I've got all that done. Now I can just slice through everything. I saw my butter fell over there, despite my best efforts. Can't win them all. And that just kind of lets you go through a stack of mushrooms real quick. You know, You'll notice that the mushroom pile and the shallots pile are about the same size, and that is not by accident. They don't have to be perfectly the same size, but you do want about the same amount of each, just for cooking purposes. They cook more evenly, and it fills the pan a little bit better. Also for presentation, you'll have a more even distribution of different ingredients, so it makes it look kind of more fancy. Now we'll get our garlic. All I'm doing is taking the skin off because we're actually going to crush the garlic into the steak. You don't want to use your knife to slam it too thin, but just by giving it a quick crush, the peel should come right off. And then if you got any bad spots, like, don't know if you can see that on that upper camera. I gotta figure out that white balance. I'm not quite sure why it's so blown out, but we'll just kind of trim those little bits off. Hey Siri, how much time is left on the timer?
Timer is 5 minutes and 32 seconds to go.
All right, that's pretty good. Yeah, Etienne, you can totally do it that way, and Jesse, hey, happy Sunday to you as well. But yes, you can 100% leave as much stem as you'd like, or once you cut the stem off, you can just like halve them and quarter them or whatever. The real reason that I recommend taking off the stem is because if you have a nice, like a huge stem, it just makes it more difficult to cut through the mushroom because it doesn't have a flat surface to lay on. If you're trying to cut something that's got like a rolly side, like if you're trying to cut it on the curved side of the outside of the mushroom, or if you have a stem that like comes out and doesn't quite, you know, sit evenly, it just slows you down because you're trying to balance the mushroom while you're cutting it. And if for whatever reason the mushroom like rolls over and moves your fingers underneath the knife, not the best way to end your evening. I'm gonna go ahead and peel the garlic for my potatoes as well, since we got just a little bit of time here. We're gonna be crushing this into the potatoes, so we don't really need to worry too much about crushing it. But it is the easiest way to get the skin off, just to give it a nice little tap. And there we go. We got our garlic, we got our shrooms. What else do we need? Parsley. Forgot to get the parsley out. So I'm just going to pick a couple of stems of parsley. Not stems, I'm sorry. I'm going to pick off some of the leafy parts of the parsley. I want a nice little, like, I don't know, quarter cup pile of leaves. And they don't have to be pretty, because we're going to be chopping them up. Go ahead and get them ready while we're waiting on our potatoes. This is basically kitchen time management. So you're not standing around doing nothing for 20 minutes while the potatoes boil. You can kind of take care of other things while you're waiting. There we go. And stems are fine if you want to use the stems. Don't have anything against them, I just don't really want to use them in this recipe. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and just give this a nice quick cut through. Kind of pile it up into a little ball, and then we will just cut through like so. And then we'll hold our knife down with one set of fingers, basically right in the crease of our fingers, and we'll just rock the other side up and down, and that'll give us a nice small kind of dice through our parsley. We don't really want to cut it up much more than that. If you still have huge honking pieces of parsley, sure, go for it, but the more you cut it down, the more you actually bruise it, and that's not what we're going for. We'll set this over here on the side as well. Hey Siri, how much time is left on the timer? 1 minute and 51 seconds. So that worked out pretty well as far as the timing goes. I'm going to go ahead and wash my knife off. And by the time we're done with that, our potatoes are probably going to be ready to be drained. Now I've got a colander right here in my sink. So what I'm going to do is just pour the potatoes out into the colander, let the water drain. And then I'm going to kind of rinse them off with cold water to kind of stop the cooking so they don't get mushy. But I'm going to leave them in the colander while we continue with our steak. The reason being the steam is actually going to dry the outside of the potatoes, and that's going to help them sear better once we get them into the pan. At the same time, we're going to take that pot that has the potatoes in it, we're going to fill it up with more water. We're going to salt that water because that's what our peas are going to go into. And I'm actually going to put it on a burner right behind me here and get it warming up while we start working on the steak. I don't need it to boil yet, but I do want to get it hot so that when I'm done with the steak and I'm done with the potatoes, I can really quickly just throw my peas in and then they'll be done. So keep that in mind. And we're back over here. These should be just about done. Got quite a bit of good evaporation on there. Let me grab a paring knife. And I'm just going to pierce right through the middle of one of these potatoes and see if it's soft. Yep. You'll get a little bit of resistance right in the middle, but it's not going to be hard. You should be able to just really easy slide in and out of the potato, and that's how you know that they're like parboiled. Set you back aside. Siri, how much time is left on the timer? Hey Siri, how much? Oh, it's done. Cool. So we're good with that. I'll bring you along with me for the ride. We got our potatoes. We're going to throw them into this colander right here. While we got them in the colander, we're just going to hit them with some cold water. You're not going to be able to cool them all the way down, so that's not the purpose of this. We're just getting a little bit of cold water to kind of stop some of the cooking. And what's going to happen is they're still hot, they're still steaming. The steam is going to dry them off in the colander. And then this we're going to set over here. Get that on like medium high-ish. Guess I can turn the light on. Cool. So we got our potatoes ready to go for the next step. They're going to dry off on their own. You're actually going to be pretty amazed how when we go over there, take care of our steak and come back to the potatoes, the outside is going to be almost completely dry. And then we're going to have our water kind of ready to go. Not quite boiling. Maybe it will be, but we want to get it hot so that when we need it to boil, we can really quickly get it there. All right, back to the food. Now we're going to start with our steak. Go ahead and put your pot on. We're going to get this on high heat. We want to let that preheat warm up a little bit. Now this pat of butter is starting to kind of fall over. Work with me here, buddy. Thanks, Laura. Take a swig while we let that kind of heat up. So, let's talk flambé. This is a dish where you are supposed to flambé cognac or brandy. If you've never done flambé before, it's really not that scary. It does sound like it, and it looks pretty impressive. Yet, on the whole, it's actually just kind of burning off alcohol. That's really the purpose of it. That way you get the sweet flavors of whatever liqueur you used or whatever spirit you used, but you don't get any of the alcohol. So I would recommend, if you have one, a long fire starter stick, fire starter thing. This is going to be the best way to be able to stay away while you light something on fire. If you don't have one of these, just be super, super careful with whatever you use. If you have maybe a bamboo skewer, something like that, maybe light the end of that and give yourself some space. It does tend to kind of flare out. So as long as you're kind of far away, you won't burn your eyebrows off. Have a fire extinguisher nearby or a pot lid. If you need to really quickly smother it out, the best way is just to cover it. It can't burn if there's no air for it. Go ahead and put some olive oil in our pan. we're gonna get our steak going. So, here's our steak. We're gonna get our steak in the pan, but the point is not to cook all the way through. We're not cooking the steak all the way through. We wanna get a nice sear on the outside for flavor. Also because once we make the pan sauce, some of that flavor is gonna kind of come off into the pan sauce. And we also wanna get a nice little crust on the bottom of the pan. So if you're using a non-stick pan, unfortunately I don't have, if you're using a stainless steel pan, that would probably be the best. I don't have any stainless steel pans that are also induction, so I'm using a non-stick, unfortunately. I could use one of my cast iron pans, but I like the sear they give my potatoes more than I like the non-stick sear. So I'm gonna, since we're gonna hide the steak under some cream sauce, I'm gonna let the steak suffer, and I'll make the potatoes look nice. So I'm gonna get this preheated just until the oil starts smoking. You'll notice it gets kind of a shimmery kind of surface on it. We're gonna go ahead and lay the steak on whichever side you think looks the best. I'm gonna do it this way. Lay it down and lay it away from you. Like so. And we're gonna let that simmer probably 2 to 3 minutes because we want a nice, again, sear on the outside. Use a spoon, use a plate, use a paper towel in your hand. You want to get as much of the steak touching the pan as you can, because otherwise it won't get any color on it. And the color is really what you're looking for. So I'll go ahead and do this. It's actually kind of a myth that putting color on the outside of a steak seals the juices in. It actually doesn't do any of that. The reason you want a nice sear on the outside is because it tastes awesome. That's literally the only reason. It's really hard to get that crust on the outside, that nice sear, if the steak is wet at all, which is why it's usually a good idea to let your steak kind of temper at room temperature, come up to room temperature for about an hour. Pat it off with a paper towel, let it sit on the paper towel while it's coming up to room temperature, and get it as dry as you can before you put it into the pan or out on the grill. It's usually the best way to get a good sear on your steaks. Or anything, really. Potatoes, if you pull the potatoes out, and when you cut through them, the centers are like super wet, you want to dry them off, otherwise you'll never get a good sear on them. Thanks, Kim. Let this go for just another minute. We'll flip it. And then I actually want to set that aside on, get a little plate. There we go. Take a quick peek. There we are. Nice sear on that steak. We're going to do the same on the backside. Sometimes the steak will actually curve away from the side that you sear the first time, which is why this is the side you want to look good, because this one's always going to have a nice sear on it. The second side sometimes curves a different way and doesn't, like, it tightens up and it doesn't sear quite as well. But you are going to still want to do the best you can to kind of get as much of that side in contact with the pan as you can. All right. I'm going to flip the steak up, sear the edge, and my second pat of butter fell over. We'll get this other side as well. All right, steak is done for what it's gonna do. Let's turn this down to medium-high now instead of sear. Put you over there, and we're gonna go straight in with our shallots. Now, if you're using cast iron or if you're using stainless steel, you're gonna have a lot of burned steak bits on the bottom. The shallots should, as they kind of sweat down, release all of that. It's like a form of deglazing, essentially, is what you're doing. The acid from the onion helps break up the steak bits. And that's where you get the steak bits are called fond. And the onions kind of help mop all that up and add it to the rest of the dish. Go ahead and season our shallots. That'll help them release some moisture. And a little bit of pepper. Now, we don't want these to get super cooked or, like caramelized or anything like that. We do want them to kind of sweat out and soften a little bit. Steak should be medium rare. I mean, that's my opinion. However, if somebody asks me for a well-done steak, I will cook it for them. And I'll just make sure that it's, I'll make sure to take my time so that it comes out well done and juicy, which is actually possible. But personally, I prefer medium rare or medium. But I'll eat a well done steak. Get that going. Kind of break up our shallots with our spoon if the tossing doesn't work. You notice the onions are kind of getting transparent, a little bit translucent. They are getting brown, but that's mostly from the steak. They're pulling up whatever of the steak is down on the bottom, which is great. At this point, we're going to go ahead and get our very softened butter in here. There we are. And our mushrooms. And we'll get our garlic in there as well. Just do one at a time. Crush. And crush. Use your knife and you can just kind of slice them off. I'm not going to worry too much about that garlic press because we're going to be crushing garlic into our potatoes as well. Turn this up to high. I'll add a little bit more seasoning. It'll help the mushrooms kind of release some of their fluid as well. All right. So this is the point. We're going to let these kind of all soften up. This is where the flambé happens. So get ready for that if you're not. Another thing, if you're cooking over flame, I would recommend you put whatever you're going to be flambeing into a little measuring cup and pour that right over the middle of the pan that you're using, because if the flame is licking up the sides of the pan, it will actually light the alcohol while you're doing it with a bottle. I don't have to worry about that since I'm on induction. There is no flame, so I have to actually use one of these fire sticks. The cool thing about doing it over the flame, though, is once you've poured it, you can literally just tip the pan like this, and it'll catch and flambe, so you can kind of keep yourself away from it. All right. Yum. You know what? Before we do that, let's go ahead and put our Worcestershire sauce. Should be about a tablespoon of that. And then About the same with your mustard. I'm using whole grain Dijon. You can use regular Dijon if you want. Totally personal preference, or whatever you have on hand. All right. And whoop. On fire. Make sure whatever you're flambeing gets on the other side of the kitchen from whatever you're lighting on fire. There we go. You should have a really nice brandy cognac smell. Hopefully you haven't burned your hand off or your eyebrows off. And now we will add our cream. I've got about 3/4 of a cup. I'm only making a steak for me. If you have 2 steaks, you probably want to use the whole cup. Go ahead and pour in our cream. We're going to turn this down to medium or low. You don't really want it to be boiling, but you do want it to start simmering. Give it a nice stir, and this will thicken up nicely. Let's go ahead and add our parsley and give it another stir. And at this point, our Steak Diane pretty much done, apart from adding the steak and letting it kind of continue to cook. So what you want to do before you put the steak in here is actually give this sauce a little bit of a taste. Maybe grab a little bit of shallot, a little bit of mushroom. Careful, it's hot. Pretty good. Use a little bit more salt. Maybe a touch more pepper. Give it a nice little swirl. There we go. And steak back in the pan. What I'm going to do, kind of move all of the chunky bits over to the side and splash cream all over everything. And we'll put our steak back in the pan. I like to say ugly side down. Whatever your not the presentation side, put that side down. And if there's any juices left on the plate, just pour them right over the top of the steak. And then we'll go ahead and spoon some of this delicious sauce over the top. Like so. Cool. So I'm going to put this pan in the oven. Make sure that your pan, if it has like plastic sides, try and see if you can figure out if it's oven safe or not. If it's all metal, it should be oven safe and have no problem. The oven is only set to 315, 325, so it shouldn't be too warm. We're just going to go ahead and toss the whole thing in there. Like so. Awesome. Steaks are ready to go. They're basically done. Next up is the potatoes. Go ahead and get that cleared. Toss all of that into the bin. This is a nice little wipe. And I'm going to get my cast iron on the cooktop and up to maximum searing again. We want to get this really hot. Hey, thanks, Doctor. Dr. Neocortex. Thanks, man. Hey, Ryan, what's up, man? Good to see you here. We got this cooking super, super hot. And Dr. Neocortex, this is just my kitchen. As far as the setup, I just have a bunch of old cameras. I have one that's actually like my main vlogging camera, which is the one right in front of me. This is like a 10-year-old camera. I've got my phone set up over there, but we're actually gonna go over there right now. We got our potatoes. They're over here in this colander, and you'll notice the outside of the potatoes are now all dry. And interesting how the steam does that, isn't it? They're also probably still pretty hot, which is fine. But we're just gonna pick them up or take the whole colander over there, however you wanna do it. But we want our potatoes over on the cutting board. So let's go. And our water over here is boiling. I'm gonna turn this down to get it closer to a simmer. Perfect. And before I forget, we're gonna add a good amount of salt to the water. There we go. You want the water to be salty, but not disgustingly salty. You just want them to be, you know, flavorful, seasoned. You want the water to be seasoned. All right, cool. So we got our pan going, we got our potatoes. We're just gonna cut our potatoes in half long ways. And then just kind of spread them out. The potatoes should not be wet in the center. If they are, grab a paper towel, dry off the centers. Otherwise, it's really hard to get that golden, crisp, seared color on them. And be careful because sometimes the skins get pretty loose and will want to peel off of the potato. Get this down to medium-high since it's smoking. There we go. There we go. The last one. There we go. Cool beans. We're going to put a little bit of olive oil in our pan. This time we're going to do it a little different. I've done this in the past where I've done the garlic, and if you're doing rosemary or any other herbs, I've done those all up at the front, basically first. We're going to put our potatoes in first. What we want to do is put them flat side down, and we want to slide them almost in like a clockwise pattern. That way you know which potatoes. You can kind of check because you'll know that this one's going to get cooked first, and you can kind of go around. And once this one's cooked, all of the rest should be cooked about the same. Careful with splashing oil. The best way is to find a spot on the pan that doesn't have very much oil. Set the potato down flat, and then slide it over to wherever you want it. Even still, since they're sizzling away, there will be a little bit of spitting of hot oil and steam coming up, so just be careful with that. I've burned myself many a time doing potatoes. Cool, cool. There we go. We'll let those cook for, I don't know, maybe a minute, 2 minutes. We're going to check this first one, and we'll see if it's cooked. If it is, we'll get the rest of them going. Awesome, Laura. What subject do you teach again? We're going to go ahead and season these guys with some salt. We'll season them again once we flip them. And don't be afraid of the salt on the potatoes. There we go. And then while we're waiting on that, go ahead and get our... No, Chive, it's not your turn yet. We're going to go ahead and get our butter in here as well. And the reason we added our potatoes first before putting in the butter, the potatoes actually bring down the temperature of the pan a bit, and then that way the butter doesn't burn so quickly. It's still going to burn after a while. But since the potatoes kind of brought down the temperature of the pan, the butter can melt and have a little bit of time to get absorbed by the potatoes to give it a really nice, rich, nutty flavor before it starts kind of browning. If you were to put the butter in first, if the pan was super hot, the butter would brown like that, and you get a bunch of basically burned butter bits in there. Not ideal. Let me go check our... Turn this back up to a boil. Like a simmer. All right, potatoes. I'm just going to use my spoon. Let's go ahead and give it a wipe. Let's check this top potato. Not quite there, almost. Now the difficulty with an induction cooktop is there's usually a ring of where the electromagnet is that's heating up the pan. That's usually the hot spot on the pan. So if these potatoes are a little bit off from that, sometimes like half the potato will brown and the other half won't. It'll still like start looking really nice and tasty. It just won't brown. The way to fix that is just kind of slide them around and make sure that, you know, they're as close to that ring as you think you can get them. On a traditional fire, you might get the same effect, basically where the ring of the, you know, gas fire is, but it's usually not as much of a problem as this. And it's still getting there. I'll turn this up to high. I'm gonna check my water. Starting to simmer. I'm gonna go ahead and throw my peas into the water. I'm just using pre-frozen green peas. They did kind of thaw out while they were at room temperature here while I was cooking, but it'll still take them a little while to cook. Easiest way to tell if they're cooked, when they start floating through the water. When they're frozen, they'll actually sink, and then as they warm up and cook through, they'll just start floating. You don't really want to cook them too long because then they get super mushy. So maybe a minute, 2 minutes, and then you will go ahead and drain them in the colander and get them back out. When all of that is done, we should be ready to plate. How are you looking? Getting there. Once we flip our potatoes, we're going to crush the garlic in here and stir it around as well. And then that'll give you the nice garlic flavor without burning the garlic, hopefully this time. And then we can pull our steak out of the oven as well. What do I want over here? I'll sync cam it real quick. Got a colander right here. These guys are all floating around. I got my larger colander for the potatoes, and I got a smaller colander for the peas. Plus, this way I can just kind of move that over there when I'm ready. All right, let's check these bad boys out. You might not be able to see it where you guys are, but on the sides, you can actually see that there's like a nice brown rim around the bottom. And there we go. Nice seared potatoes. And start kind of flipping them around. We know that once we have gotten that top one cooked, the rest of them should more or less be cooked. And we don't have to worry too much about cooking them through, because that's what the parboiling step that we did at the very beginning took care of. We're just getting a nice color on them. There we go. And the last one. Flippity-doo-dah, flippity-yay. Can't wait to go back to Disneyland. All right. Season the tops of these guys with a little bit of salt. Turn this back down to medium-low, or medium. And we'll get our garlic in. Now we're not so much worried about getting any kind of color on the potatoes. We just want to make sure the garlic has a little bit of time to infuse into them. Cool. Take all this to the sink. And while I'm over here, I'll grab a nice plate to serve on. There we go. All right. Get our butter mixed through. And not quite ready for you. Let's use some of these chives. Fresh from the garden. Cut them nice and thinly. Now these are the last thing I'm going to add to this hot pan. And then we're pretty much going to scoop all of this out. There we go. We're going to cut a few more chives for the presentation, or for the plating. There we are. You guys come over here. Turn off this guy. And let's grab a spoon. Give these guys a good mix. All right. I'm going to flip these guys up so that I can see which ones are more browned than the others. And those are going to be the ones that I put on last. They're all cooked, but I want them to look good. You don't have to do this. This is just me making it taste better on Instagram. So I'm going to grab these ones that are cooked, but just a little bit, look a little bit underdone. We'll get them down kind of on the bottom to create a base for the ones that are nicely seared. There we go. And so I cooked 6 potatoes here, and that means I'm going to get 12 halves. So it is actually quite a bit of potato. Just means I get leftovers later. There we are. Any of the little burn pieces will kind of move off. And put you there. Now I'm going to grab my steak last. I'm going to let it sit in the oven. The oven is a little bit hotter, so it should be kind of cooking the steak a little bit more thoroughly, but not all the way through. Or I should say it's not going to overcook the steak, or shouldn't overcook the steak. A little bit of chive on top of our potato. And we'll get all these little danglers kind of hidden. There we go. Next up is the peas. Grab these bad boys. Set them over on this side. And now you have a decision to make. You can just put the honkin' piece of steak on the plate, or you can cut it, like pre-slice it, into pretty looking chunks, I guess. Let's go ahead and pull it out of the oven and make a decision. I'm gonna grab a pot holder because this pan is gonna be hot. So grab your pot holder, grab your pan. I've got a nice granite countertop that I can set it on. If you don't have granite, go ahead and put a pot holder down, or even if you do have granite, probably not a bad idea to put it on a pot holder anyway. But the granite can take the heat. We'll do both. And just be careful because it's going to be really warm. All right, so here's our steak. Let's slide this over to the side. We'll take a look at our steak on the cutting board. We'll see if we want to cut that up or if we want to just put that on the plate. I don't think I have enough room on the plate for that steak. All right, so let's do this. Take off that bit. Steak is cooked perfectly medium rare. I'm going to cut diagonally on a bias like so. There's our beautiful medium rare steak. I'm going to take this bottom piece, flip it upside down, and set it down right under the potatoes like so. And then I'm going to cut other ones similarly on a bias. We'll get a little bit of an interesting plating going on here. Something like that. Careful with the steak, it's probably super hot. I have heat resistant hands since I do a lot of cooking. And I want it like so. And the last bit. Cool. We all know that if you make something look better, it tastes better. There's our beautiful Steak Diane. The only thing left is make sure you hold on to your pan with a pot holder, or in my case, I'm just using my towel. We'll get some of this sauce with the delicious mushrooms and shallots. Right over the top of the steak like so. Now this steak looks a little bit different than my original Instagram photo. Just a little bit more of the sauce. And there we go. Grab a few mushrooms, put on the top, just so you can see that they're there. Perfect. I'm just going to kind of drizzle some sauce down at the bottom, fill in the gaps. And last but not least, this little itty bitty bit that I missed, or that I got over. And there we go. Steak Diane done. This last bit of steak, if you're cooking for somebody, this is the treat piece that Dad gets. If Dad's you know, one of those pickers, or even the chef, you can grab a bit, run it through some of your sauce, and see how it tastes. Oh yeah. That is delicious. All right, let me do that so you can see the chat. Perfect. All right. We got Steak Diane. We got beautiful seared potatoes, garlic potatoes, and green peas. Done. Totally, Ryan. I can send it over. It might not taste as good when it gets to you. Might take a week or so to get out there. See, we can turn off our oven now. Everything else is off. We're good to go. Awesome. Let me grab my sync cam, which is my phone, and take an Instagram pic. And then we'll bite into this. I'll let you know how it tastes. Doo-doo-doo. Hopefully you all give this a try. It's a fantastic dish to make. It took me total time about 1 hour and 5 minutes, and it really shouldn't take you much longer than that, and you get a full meal. And this scales very well if you got 3 or 4 steaks, slightly bigger pan. increase the ingredients for the sauce just a little bit. You just need to adjust it a bit. And you can have all of this. 6 potatoes is a ton of potatoes. I'm probably not going to eat all of this tonight. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can scale this up real quick. It looks super impressive. It looks very fancy, but it's actually a really easy dish to make. Let's see. Get our portrait shot going. That looks good. And we'll do one with the potatoes in the front as well. We'll see which one looks better. And there we go. All right, now I need a fork and a knife. Whoop. Grab a bit of this steak. Some of the sauce on there. Oh, that's good. That is tasty. Potatoes are nice. Very kind of gentle garlic flavor. Delicious. I would probably use rosemary as well. Didn't think about it. But I could put rosemary in there as well, and that would also complement this flavor. And of course the peas are peas. Yum. Yum, yum. Cool. Well, if any of y'all made this dish, somebody is texting me up, and I'm going to see if they made it and sent me pictures. That might be what that is. By all means, put them in the comments. Link out to Imager or Instagram or any of the other places that host images, and let me know what you think and let me know what you did, because I love seeing what other people have put together for these cook-along lives. This is episode 28, and next week we'll see what I'm doing. It'll be Sunday, 4:30. Go ahead and like, subscribe, blah, 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 YouTube, etc. And on the end screen, you're going to see my handle for any other social network that you want to follow me on. Lots of food pics on Instagram, and recipes and ingredients, not recipes, ingredients get posted there the week before we start doing the cooking. So hope to see you guys there, and looking forward to seeing what you made. Have a great evening, and I will see you next week.